Hi, I'm Malcolm Clemens Young, and welcome to the online forum. We're glad to have you tonight. Humans, unlike other animals that are drawn to water, are not natural-born swimmers. We must be taught. Our evolutionary ancestors learned for survival. Now in the 21st century, we swim in freezing Arctic waters and piranha-infested rivers to test our limits. Swimming is an introspective and silent sport in a chaotic and noisy age. It's therapeutic for both the mind and the body, and it's an adventurous way to get from point A to point B. It's also one route to that elusive, ecstatic state of flow. And this year, when the Cathedral is exploring the theme of healing, and especially because of my own love for the ocean, we want to ask what draws us to water despite its dangers, why we come back to it again and again, and what that says about being human. My guest tonight is Bonnie Tsui, a swimmer and surfer, a longtime journalist for the New York Times, and the author of a just published children's book, Sarah and the Big Wave, about the first woman to surf Mavericks. She's also the author of Why We Swim. Bonnie, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're very glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And today it's actually a kind of a historic night for me. My brother gave birth to a little baby girl, and her name is Oceana.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? So here we go. Of all
that
the
is a heroic name to have on your shoulders, but I'm sure that Oceana will carry that forward. That's amazing. Congratulations.
I know. I'm so excited. I mean, it's just, it's so great when you have news like that. I've been thinking so much about this. I don't, it's like COVID's kind of wrapping up now. We're starting to gather in person again at the Cathedral. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about COVID and kind of the world of swimming, how it affected the world of swimming. In surfing, what it meant was that surfing was basically illegal, right? So you go to the beach and there's all these signs saying, go home, don't come here. You're in all the parking lots. And then surfing became completely not illegal. And there's like way too many surfers.
Right, right.
I think we're getting a little bit back to normal. I don't know.
That whole trajectory of both of those sports, like in this time, was so interesting to me because basically it was swimming, right? All the pools closed for many, many months. And so if you were a pool swimmer, you were out of luck. And then with surfing, I mean, at least here in the Bay Area, the beaches were never officially closed the way they were, say, in Southern California, right? So you were allowed to use the beach. But there was definitely this feeling of uncertainty in the early days where, you'd show up at the beach and you were never really sure if there was going to be like the parking lot was going to be all like taped up, or that, there would be signs telling you to go home. And then of course, gradually it became clear that actually that was probably the safest thing you could be doing in an outdoor, health fitness perspective. And so thankfully that, that was still available to everyone. And like you said, the number of surfers at Dawn Patrol, usually it's not what it is now. It's been quite crowded, but you could still find those moments of grace and quiet and calm if you get out there at first light or before first light when it's still, it's still dark.
It's true. And, it's been such a blessing for me. I mean, to have surf be available during this time. I just feel so fortunate for that. And even though there's like zillions of more people in the water and the surfboard makers couldn't keep up with all the demand.
They couldn't get their blanks to make
completely
boards and
shape them completely.
Yeah. But, I feel like I do feel like it's been wonderful to see people, even though selfishly you want to have the waves to yourself, it is wonderful to see people experiencing that joy for the first time. And, that freedom in the water where you don't feel scared and you don't feel anxious, in that moment that you can be blissfully free of that.
And I've noticed a lot more teenagers that have been just kind of getting into it. And that makes me happy to see them. They're just kind of struggling, learning how, and it kind of reminds me of what it was like when I was younger. Your book, Why We Swim, is so filled with so many. Oh, there we go. I like your little paperback version.
It's the summer version.
I even have like the little tape on the top because I tore the dust jacket. It has so many inspiring figures and characters in there. I wonder if you could just tell us about one swimmer who really inspires you.
Well, I will talk about one swimmer here in the Bay Area who figured very prominently in the well-being section of the book, Kim
Kim
Chambers.
Chambers, yeah.
She's an incredible human and on so many levels, but she was the first woman to swim from the Farallones to San Francisco. And she did it, she was not a lifelong swimmer. She did it after almost losing her leg to amputation after an accident where she fell on the stairs and had a severe injury called a leg compartment syndrome. And basically, the pressure builds up in your leg from a blunt force trauma that can result in amputation. And so she had to spend 2 years really relearning how to walk properly. And in order to save her leg, they had to cut her legs to relieve the pressure. And it's like a very traumatic event, again, on so many levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, to recover from that. And being someone who is like incredibly driven, an athlete her whole life. And she, was embarrassed about the scars in her leg. And then she started to swim because she remembered when she was a kid, growing up in New Zealand, that she would visit her grandparents by the shore. And just this freedom in the water. She wasn't like a big swimmer, but that she remembered that feeling, again, that we talk about, where you just are in the moment and like outside of yourself and not worrying about things. And so she kind of sought that out in the pool. And then she was invited by some swimming friends to go to swim at Aquatic Park in San Francisco Bay with the Dolphin Club. And she said, she'd been living here in San Francisco in the Bay Area for a long time. And she said, "What? Who swims out in the Bay? Like, nobody does that." And of course, Dolphin Clubbers and the South End Rowing Club, they all do that. And she says, I just will never forget how she told me the story. She said, not many people have video footage of their rebirth, so her friends like filmed her as she got in the water and swam around. And she said that she was like this broken, skinny, 120-pound woman who was just like scared of the world, afraid of her scars, and then she just was like hooting and hollering and laughing. And that was like her rebirth. She talks about it like that. And it really was, right? She started to train with Dolphin Clubbers. She got a coach, and she became, it turns out she's like freakishly gifted at open water, long distance swimming. And how amazing to have that, from some just really terrible event to come out of that, knowing that you have the strength and the resilience to build something new, for her.
One of my favorite parts of her story is just that, she has this latent talent. Here's this person who's, going through life not swimming at all. And she has something that she doesn't even know that she has. And this terrible tragedy just kind of like awakens that. What makes her such a good swimmer? Like, is it some physiological quality that she has, or is it just like her focus, or is it just something she just loved and didn't know she loved?
She has a really high pain tolerance and serious grit. And she's really funny because she talks about how when she first started swimming, Vito Biala, who was one of her sort of early mentors, said, your technique is terrible. You couldn't swim your way out of a paper bag with flippers on. That's great. And she's like, oh, okay, well, I have some room for improvement, and takes all of that with like her characteristic lightness and like, I will charge after this thing and get better. She's not insulted by that. She thinks it's funny and, just works really hard. And I think that it's a combination of all of those things. She obviously has a real drive to succeed and to get better. And she has like this very singular, she can motivate herself. It comes from within for sure. Some people are, at least when they talk about why they do things or attempt amazing feats, they seem to talk about it in an externally motivated way. I would say, from having spent all this time with her and talked with her about just all of these things that have happened to her in life and how she's even in like the darkest times, she finds it within herself to keep going. I think that that's really something that is within her. And I give her a really great credit for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's another thing I think is extraordinary, that there's certain people who can just focus their attention and accomplish extraordinary things. I go by Aquatic Park all the time. I see the swimmers in there, and I just like, I love what they're doing, but I would love to know more about like the history of the Dolphin Club and the South End Rowing Club. Like I know they came into being in the 1870s or sometime around then. Like, what's the history of this group, and kind of like what kind of characters are in there? I mean, like, is there something that they share in common besides, cold water? It sure makes. I mean, every time I go in the water and someone complains to me about how cold it is, I think of those guys out.
And you think of those guys just going out day after day after day, and that's like their regular. I think one thing that I found so amazing about researching and writing this book, and specifically with learning how to tolerate the cold water without a wetsuit, is that the human body really is very adaptable to cold water immersion. Like, you just have a few days in a row of doing that where you increase like the time. The first day, of course, it's all in your head and you're just freaking out about how cold it is. And then you just, little by little, you adapt so that you can last for much longer. And you don't feel the cold as much. And it's just like certain physiological changes are occurring that you can do that. And then, of course, if you stop doing it, you kind of have to start all over again. That's what a lot of, I've noticed that for myself, that my tolerance for it really, like, it just, I was spending time recently with the Mexican long distance swimmer and also world record holder like him, Antonio Arguelles. He was training here last week, and he's going to make an attempt on the double English Channel this summer to be the oldest person to do it. So he had been training, and so he and Kim had, if you've read the book, if our readers have our audience has read the book, they'll know that Antonio and Kim swam this, were sort of co-captains of this swim across the border a couple years ago.
Right, that was such a powerful section.
Yeah, and to raise awareness of border deaths at the border between the US and Mexico. And it was a friendship swim, basically. But he told me, so we finally met in person actually last week, and he said, he'd been put off his attempt on the double English Channel for a year because of COVID. And he hadn't been able to get into cold water to train. And he said, he'd been swimming in the pool, and he was training with one of like Mexico's top like Olympic hopefuls. And then it was kind of heartening for me for when he told me, and he does, like, this is what he does, like swims, does these big epic swims in cold open water, that because he hadn't trained in cold water for so long, he had to start again. I mean, he basically had to like do this whole regimen of like adapting to it and increasing his time in frigid water. And I don't know, something about that was comforting, because it was like, even this guy who's like a beast in the water has to do that. If you don't practice doing it, then you need to get back into it. And I don't know, it made me feel like that we're all closer together, different slices of humanity. Yeah, it was accessible to me.
It's one of the most interesting things. When I was a little boy, I mean, it just part of the only time in my life that I swam was when I was a graduate student in the East Coast. And the only reason I swam was just like stay in shape during the winter so I could surf all the rest of the year. And, if I'd gone to graduate school like 10 years later, I would have just surfed through the winter, because that's what my friends in Maine do. They surf through the winter.
Yeah, winter surfing is a thing now.
Yeah, but it really wasn't a thing before. And I wonder if we're just, as a species, just getting less afraid of cold water. I mean, part of it is just like having 5 mil wetsuits helps a lot.
I think that's your bigger thing.
But I do wonder if just like if we're starting to have like a new idea, a new sense of what's possible for human beings in cold water.
I think so. I think that our knowledge of hypothermia and, cold water immersion, what happens to human bodies in cold water, is only increasing. I mean, there's been a lot of, even in the course of the years that I was writing the book, researching and writing the book, there were studies coming out about longevity and pain and arthritis patients and all of these things that were super interesting, that were new. I mean, or like brown fat.
Oh yeah, right. I love that section.
All of that stuff is
Yeah.
is relatively new and only kind of, just getting more and more granular in the knowledge that we have.
I'm losing my hearing because of the bone growth in my ears.
Oh, you are? Oh.
Yeah. But I wonder just.
You have to get it drilled?
I haven't yet. My friends have had multiple drillings. It just doesn't sound very fun. I'm going to wait until I absolutely have to get it drilled before I get it drilled.
Is that good? Come on.
Sometimes I have to warn the people who work very closely with me that I'm not getting everything that they're saying. But yeah, I wonder just like, what are the physiological effects of swimming, just in terms of just how it changes your body? I mean, you're probably wearing like major ear protection when you're swimming. And
well, I mean, when I'm swimming, because I obviously have surfed through the winter here, but I don't wear earplugs. And when I swim, I am mostly swimming in pools, except when I can't, right? So like for the first part of pandemic, there were no pools open here and I couldn't get, so I was swimming in the bay. But, even so, the bay was not, I mean, I think the coldest I'd been swimming in was like 50, like low 50s, like 51 or so. I mean, it's quite cold, but I wouldn't stay in that long. I am definitely very conscious of the hearing. I think it's called exosis.
I think that's what you said in the book. I didn't even know what it was called. It was just like
but it is, I mean, that's like a known. And what I was interested to learn about that is that it's not necessarily immersion, cold water immersion, but like sailors get that too. Like it's just like cold, like wind. And I think
the other things, you get it, like your ear tells you which is the prevailing wind.
Yeah, right.
Because you get less. Which
way are you surfing? Are you?
Yeah, right. If you're facing onto the ocean, you're going to get more in the right ear.
Yeah,
and it's so funny.
Yeah,
but other physiological effects, just in terms of just like, how does your body change just from swimming? Like in what ways are you stronger? Or, what effect does it have on your heart rate? And
I mean, I loved learning about all of that. Just that, dopamine levels shooting up, metabolism, going up multiple, manyfold. From, depending on like the temperature of the water, of course, affects you, but also just like being around it, listening to it, looking at it, the water, that affects your brain activity, that your alpha wave activity goes up. And and it makes perfect sense if you just from an anecdotal perspective, those are that brain waves that are associated with calm and relaxation and creativity. And you do feel that way. You feel that you reflect, your body is reflecting, and your mind set are reflecting the qualities of the water, that there is a lot going on there. And that the water feels really good. I have a good news and bad news on the surfing waterfront right now, which is that the week before last, I broke 2 ribs surfing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that sucks.
That sucks. I totally done the same thing.
The good news
is the same thing in San Diego.
Oh yeah, that happened to you too?
Yeah.
Let's talk offline about your regimen for recovery, because I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, definitely. You just kind of wait it out, I'm afraid.
It
hurts so much. You just like think you're gonna die. I'm so sorry.
Getting out of bed is the worst. Like, I never thought that would be the worst part of my day, but it really is.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
The good news is that this is day 12, and I feel so much better now than I thought I would. days 1 to 3 where I was just deep in this hole. But tomorrow I'm gonna get back into the pool, not really to swim, but just to kind of like float around and just feel buoyed by being in there. But I just was waiting I didn't think it was gonna come this soon, but feel good.
Yeah, that's good. I'll keep you in my prayers, because that is such a tough deal. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just kind of like the connection between surfing and swimming. I mean, just like the cultures seem really different, but there does seem like there's overlap. I mean, I'm definitely not one of those people who came into surfing through swimming, but I have friends who are more like that.
I definitely feel like there's overlap. You're right, though. I mean, in that the populations are not, the Venn diagram is not perfect.
Yeah.
But I have been out in the water in the pandemic, and people have, this is so nerdy, but people have recognized me from the book, and I'm like,
cool.
Well, that means that you are deep into swimming, because no one is like, that has never happened to me before.
Right,
so clearly they're reading a lot, they're swimming, and they're out surfing. So there's some thing happening there, some synergy that I have hit that I feel really, really happy about. But that there are a lot of master swimmers who are surfers, I think. In those community, I mean, I think that if you're kind of looking for an aquatic tribe, those two sports obviously support each other. But you're right, it's like, it's not that, there are also very, very separate. I think that both practitioners of both sports are after, some mind and body practice that they haven't necessarily thought about it as such, but once you start talking to them about it, absolutely they'll talk about how swimming or surfing is the thing that has gotten them through hard times, especially now.
And that's another question I had for you completely. Like, when I'm surfing, I'm basically just like looking for the next wave. I'm not thinking of anything.
Isn't that wonderful?
Like, I'm just thinking, it is, it's great. Like, is the wind coming up from the south? That's like all I'm thinking. And I wonder, when you're swimming back and forth in the laps, what do you think about?
I thought, when I was writing the last section of the book, the flow section, it was so funny, because I would either go to the pool or I would go to the bay, and I would get in the water, because I wanted to interrogate that for myself. And I would get in the water, and then I would start swimming, and I would think, what am I thinking about? And then, look at the birds, or notice the way the water felt, or the way the light looked, or did I hit some seaweed, or, just, am I worrying about problems? Am I thinking about, like worrying about something my kids were going through, or that, or like also lately, like just noticing, how is my body feeling,
Right.
as, is my shoulder aggravated or whatever. And it's a check-in. It's a check-in with yourself. I think swimming is different from surfing. Pool swimming is definitely different from surfing, because you can allow your mind to wander, right? You're just you're in the circumscribed known quality, this shape that you're just on autopilot, and then your mind can wander. But surfing demands your attention. And because you're attentive to the moment, I think that's liberating in its own way. So it's like two kinds of mental states that I appreciate, because they're both enabled by water, but they are different.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book was the Neolithic paintings from sub-Saharan Africa of swimmers, like cave drawings of swimmers from 10,000 years ago. And I wonder if you can say, like how do you know that those people are swimming? Like, the experts and the archaeologists look at that. Like, so how do they determine that? I wondered about that.
There's definitely, there's some debate about it. Some scholars say, like, oh, it could be that these are souls ascending to the afterworld, but then if you're a swimmer and you look at these drawings, you're like, they're definitely doing the breaststroke. I mean, they're like frog kicking up the walls of a cave. And it's it is definitely open to interpretation. Of course it is, but isn't in any art, right?
Yeah,
But it is very easy to and also I think art is I haven't thought about it like this, but a swimmer will see that. But maybe if you don't swim, you'll say, maybe that's not what that is,
right,
Um,
right.
but I do think that it's really interesting how when Laszlo Almasi, the Hungarian explorer who discovered the Cave of Swimmers, found the cave and then speculated that the people who had made the art, made the paintings, were actually had like there were lakes nearby, and at the time, like any theory of climate change was so radical that people were like, this guy's crazy. And then his editor wrote this, like apparently wrote some note or footnote saying like, I don't agree with
this.
yeah, this theory. And then it's been so fascinating then, of course, in the decades since, that all of this science has been amassed, where they have found, they found the dried lake beds and, all of these, all of the evidence of like certain planetary shifts that moved the monsoons like north and south, like in Africa. And so that this is like the period of time that was called the Green Sahara.
Yeah.
And I love then thinking about like, they'll also have like skeletons of huge fish and piles of clamshells in the Sahara. I mean, that's
and as you say, you described it, even a burial that could very well have been of people who drowned. I thought that was so
yeah. I mean, I that was amazing also to get to see that. I visited the lab in the book. I talked about this, visiting the lab of Paul Sereno, who is a paleontologist who discovered these settlements around this paleo lake system in the Sahara. And he said, you want to meet them? You want to see them? Because I'd only read about them. I read about them in National Geographic. I like looked at the pictures. And when I visited his lab in Chicago, he showed me, he had that burial, I guess I can't remember what the archaeological term is, when they've, taken the excavation and then they've preserved it. They've cut it out basically so that you can look at it, in a vertical manner. And it was unreal, like just to be in the same space as that, like the burial of basically what they think is a mother and two children, having been laid to rest deliberately in a certain way. There were no markings of disease or trauma that would explain that they would have died in that way. And so that's why the theory from all of the scientists who've studied this dig is that they drowned. And I just imagine, your mind just goes to the story that feels so eternal, right? It feels it can happen now. It does happen now.
Well, I mean, in the Chronicle yesterday, there was that article. So tragic. And you go to the beach with both your children, and you come home and you only have one of them because it was a horrible story. And it did make it really human, the way people swim, or in different cultures too. I love that. You described so many different cultures and their approach to swimming. Maybe you could share out with us one of those cultural practices that you like. It could be the Japanese, or it could be the Baju, or somebody that has a swimming culture, and what you learned from that.
I mean, I love talking about Nihon Eiho, which is the Japanese swimming martial art. It's Japanese classical swimming, but it's also called samurai swimming because it is basically dates back to the feudal period of Japan, where all of these parcels of land were defended by samurai clans. And depending on where they were located, on the ocean or on a river or on a lake or whatever, the samurai had to devise different ways of, and techniques and skills of like protecting that piece of land from invaders, right? So, if you think about like a big, big waves on shore, how would you effectively go out to meet the enemy and not drown. And so there's like these documented strokes of like really doing like a very vertical arm stroke to like cut through and have your head so you can sight, or very, very still techniques for treading water and keeping your body, your upper body buoyed up, but like barely making a ripple. And again, these are things that you can look up on YouTube and see.
Oh, I'm going to totally do that. I'm glad you told me that.
Yes, you can see like people firing arrows or sword fighting, or this is one of my favorite ones, and it's a move called the Flying Mullet. Have you heard of that one? The Flying Mullet is basically a skill where the person who's doing it can jump out of the water using just the propulsive force of their body into it like a boat, like over the side of like a rowboat.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
It's unreal. That's another thing. I just like, how did like the swim strokes kind of get like unified? Like, I mean, every culture must have had its own way of swimming.
Yeah.
And then in the 20th century, did there's just kind of a consensus evolve about how to swim?
Well, there are definitely, like, so, I mean, one thing that was interesting to learn was that freestyle, or what we know as the freestyle, that event used to just be like, it was
whoever can go the fastest.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Right. It's a freestyle. It's your choice. And of course, over time, that defaulted to a front crawl stroke that, has been kind of been tweaked over time, where the beats of the kick are different, or the timing of the arm strokes are different. And then what you do with your head, like, are you up like this or are you breathing, have been so refined such that the front crawl, Australian crawl versus, various other, over time they've been parsed out and different changes made, but that essentially it defaulted to the front crawl stroke because that became the fastest, but it wasn't always like freestyle. It wasn't always synonymous with that front crawl stroke, which I find so interesting.
Yeah, me too. The way people throw shot put and discus is like completely different.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Can you imagine just like some basic, like if in the future, a golf swing looks completely different than what I like, just like taking like physical activities and just trying to perfect those. Yeah. But I wonder just like about the breathing part too. It's just like, does swimming affect your breath? Does it change how you breathe? Do you notice a change when you're kind of like in training versus when you're kind of more out of it?
I've actually been super attuned to my breath in the last couple of weeks because of the broken ribs.
Injury, yeah.
And I realized that, the expansion of your rib cage and your chest and all of the muscles, all of those interstitial muscles, are doing so much in concert. And when something is wrong, you don't feel like you can catch a breath. Your body then responds to that because, there are all these, kind of reflexes that we have where, your breath, it's a feedback mechanism. So if you start to, hyperventilate or something, that has certain effects on how you start to feel, and your body, your pulse increasing, and you're feeling like, oh, fight or flight. You don't feel well. You feel stressed because you are doing something physically that is, that has been, over time, over, many years of evolution, that our bodies respond in this way because of threats. And so if you just start to do something like hyperventilate or breathe very shallowly, that adds a lot of stress to your body. And so you just actually don't feel well, and you continue to not feel well because you're not able to take the deep breaths to do all of these things to your body that are the right things, the healthy things to do. So that's something that has been really interesting for me to feel very acutely in the recent days, because that's not something that I normally feel. And so with swimming, one of the things I learned with the book is that, you are constantly calibrating your breath and taking big, deep breaths and holding them and exhaling slowly. And that's like that's like a relaxation technique. And that's why I think in a lot of ways, swimming is moving meditation. A lot of people have said like, oh, I gave up yoga because swimming is basically yoga, but in the water. And I feel, and I also get the endorphin rush from it that I don't get from yoga. And that's super interesting to me. I mean, the first time someone said it to me, I thought, wow, that's, I hadn't thought about the role of breath that's built into swimming, because you can't breathe underwater, that you have to control it. And the rhythm of it has everything to do with how well you are swimming. So it's all about efficiency and really timing.
Right. In your book, you talk a little bit about just your anxiety and fear of death, which, everybody has that in just different, it comes out in different ways, I think. But I wonder if you can talk about any times where you felt in danger, either when you were surfing or swimming, and it just didn't feel safe.
Well, a couple of times sadly recently, where other than the broken rib incident, where the instant that it happened, I thought, I definitely feel like I broke something and I need to get into shore.
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling. And the reason you broke something is because it's so dang big anyway, and it's harder to get in.
It was just awful. But we were back east in Florida visiting my father-in-law earlier last month. And Florida is where all the sharks are.
Yeah,
I mean, the other sharks besides the great white sharks that we have here. Most of the shark encounters in the US happen in Florida. And so I had reason to think of sharks recently because I wrote a story about them, and I wrote about Ron Elliott, who has been a long time underwater photographer out in the Farallones, and spend a lot of time with the great whites during the feeding season there, and thinking about fear and resilience and sort of how we cope with that, and what occupies our minds, why we place so much of a premium on certain things to like feel that they're risky versus other things. Why
right.
We're not, you and I are not fearing sharks when we go out for our surfs, because that's a decision we've made and something we've calculated, and then we don't think about it. And yet, I think now sometimes when I'm driving that someone cuts me off or something, and I think this could totally kill me at any moment, and I not really worrying about this, but then I feel like I have been starting to think about it because I've been thinking about like the odds or the statistics that are actually much more realistic, that you would get into a car accident. Anyway, so when I was thinking about sharks, I was out swimming a ton in Florida, and it's so beautiful, in this part of Florida, and but the Blacktip reef sharks were out in full effect, hundreds of them, like feeding offshore. And actually, I found out after some fishermen were kind of like, they were in a boat and they saw me swimming, and they said, there are some big sharks circling our boat, and like, you're braver than I am. And so I got out of the water and I went home, and then I Googled to see what was happening with sharks recently, and it turned out a kid had gotten bit at the pier like 3 weeks before, and I thought,
oh man,
how do I then recalculate it, do I get back in the ocean? What are the odds? And of course, it's so imperfect, you have no idea, like you can't really, it's just more like you learn all the information and then you just make a decision that's really not necessarily based on logic.
One of our traditions is we take questions from our audience. We're starting to just get a zillion questions.
Okay.
So here's one. When did you start swimming and why? Do you remember what it felt like and what you thought about on your first swim? And do you still feel that wonder?
That is such a great question. I don't remember the very first time, but I write about an early experience that I had swimming at Jones Beach in New York when I was growing up as a kid. And that's part of the opening of Why We Swim, where it's that joy of like when you standing in the surf and the big swell comes, and then everyone goes, whoa, and like jumps
Yeah,
up and
right.
then gets their
Completely.
feet, and then just waiting for the next one, and just floating and swimming with my brother and my cousins, and just being so happy. Like we spent like so many summer days like that, and then I got knocked over by, like, I got hit from behind by a wave, and I just was sort of super disoriented and couldn't find my way up. And I remember that moment underwater, like expanding like forever, like it just
Oh,
seemed to
yeah.
hold like a lifetime, and thinking like, oh, I can't really tell which way is up. And then my cousin like accidentally kicked me, and and the water is sort of murky, it's green. And then that's how I found my way to and then I remember feeling embarrassed. I was super embarrassed because I didn't want
Yeah,
people to.
right.
And I
Completely.
just pretended nothing happened, and I kept swimming again. And that is a very, I think about that a lot, because it is something that I, of course, with teaching my kids to swim, and them now having passed through that age, and they're 8 and 10 now, they're swimming on the swim team. But when they were first learning how to swim and first really being excited about the ocean, I could not stop thinking about that moment, because I wanted them to have that unfettered joy, and then also to understand on some level that, like, the water can kill you.
Right.
And not
Completely.
have that be
Yeah.
oppositional
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
damning way. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I totally do. Because you want them to be safe, but
yeah.
you're exactly right. Okay. Question about Kim Chambers. What is her ape factor? Did it contribute to her open water abilities?
Her what factor?
I don't know. I can't even read it. My eyesight's so bad. Ape factor, APE.
Hmm.
All right. So here's the next question. I've heard it said that swimming is the only physical activity that uses every muscle in the body. Is that confirmed by today's body of knowledge?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but it does seem plausible. And if you find this out, report back. We would love to
Yeah,
hear.
I will. I totally will. Here's another question. I would like to swim in the bay more. However, feet and hands get painfully frozen after 15 minutes in the bay. Do you have any tips to slow this down or minimize this?
Yeah, I don't know if the person who posed this question is swimming with a wetsuit or not. I also sometimes see people who don't swim with wetsuits, just wearing regular swimsuits, swim with gloves, and they have little also booties. So, or like an insulated cap. And so if it's just your extremities that are feeling that they're not, and sometimes that I think people's sort of peripheral circulation is not as great, whereas they're like, the most of their body can withstand it, but their fingers and toes can't. I do see people with like just light neoprene gloves and booties, so that might help you.
Yeah. Here's another question. What do you think of the My Octopus Teacher movie and The Swimmer?
I loved that movie.
Me
I
too. I
love
totally loved
watching
it. I
it with
preached about
kids.
it.
It was just so the wonder of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Everything about just cross species communication of some sort. It just seemed very clear that there's something going on there that we just don't fully understand. And I just thought that was really beautiful. Yeah, I loved it. Obviously there are things that are complicated about the relationship with this octopus. I think I read, a review that was largely positive, and then at the end it said something like, it's not clear what the octopus got out of the deal. But I don't know. It seemed like there was some, something. I just find the whole idea that we are so, like, from such different parts of the evolutionary tree or root
Right.
system or bush or whatever,
Completely.
that,
Exactly.
yeah, that there could be this incredibly intelligent uh, animal that works so differently from the way we work, and yet has clearly the intelligence to match us in many ways. I
Yeah.
just thought that
Yeah.
was so cool. I loved it.
Did you ever read Grayson by Lynn Cox, that book?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
loved that book. It was basically her swimming in Southern California, just offshore, and
Whale.
discovering a pod of whales.
Yeah. I felt similarly about Cy Montgomery's The Soul of an Octopus.
Oh yeah, right. I've got that on my list.
That book is so good. And
Yeah.
she writes about this relationship. I mean, it's not unlike The Octopus Teacher, except that the relationship she develops with this octopus is in the aquarium.
Uh-huh.
Because she had spent a bunch of time in the field researching and studying other octopuses, but this particular octopus that she develops a relationship with is in the, but there's like similar kind of just extraordinary stories of connection and meaningful connection that it just blows my mind.
I love that. So I have a friend who's a surfer from Santa Cruz, and this is what she says. She says, "What are your thoughts on Ocean Ramsay, the woman who swims with great whites in an effort to conserve shark populations? As a former surfer who never quite got over my irrational shark phobia, I find her work awe-inspiring."
Yeah, I mean, I think about Kimmy Werner, same thing. She's this Hawaiian. Oh, you probably know about her. She's this. She was in the documentary Fish People.
Yeah.
She's like a spearfishing champion, but she also there's footage of her swimming with a great white, just kind of cruising along, holding on to the dorsal fin.
Yeah, right. If that's like completely, it's an amazing image.
What do I think? I mean, I think that what I think is sort of beyond words, but you can see from my face that I'm agog that this happens.
Yeah. Yeah, we my local spot in Hawaii has started to have shark attacks. I always kind of justified it's all the other side of the island where the tourists are, and now it's starting to not be on the other side of the island where the tourists
I mean, I do think it's really interesting how we, as a human species, we have very particular ways of justifying our behavior and like processing threat. And sharks have outsized influence actually on human behavior, which is funny because like there are very, very few.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Well, that's what I mean. It's just like, how many people do I know who've been attacked by, I mean, I've seen sharks, but I mean, how many people do I know from 30 years of surfing in Ocean Beach? How many people do I know who are attacked by, sharks? Not that many. So one of the questions that just came in is, could you say a bit more about the Dolphin Club? Are there criteria to join? Like,
no, I think you just want to. No, I think that they are very, as intimidating as the Dolphin Club or the South End Rowing Club may seem, they are very welcoming. I don't know what is happening with the actual club facility itself. I don't think that the building is open yet, but in normal non-COVID times, there are drop-in days where you can try out the facility and like go for swims and because it's nice because there's like a sauna. I think that when you're starting out, it's nice to have a place where it's not just you leaving your towel at the bleachers.
Exactly.
So it's nice to have a place to go. And also, and I write about this in the book, like the community there is wonderful. So in the sauna, it's not just the place you warm up. It's like your soul gets warmed up too, because you're chatting with all of the people.
Oh, that's great. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was Sarah and the Big Wave. Just what was that like writing that? And how do you work with an illustrator when you're writing a children's book? I mean, because I went through this period of my life when we had small children and we were reading, we'd have like, I had like 70 different items checked out of the local library because we were reading like 7 picture books a night. Yeah. So I mean, it's a lot of material, but I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what that process was like, where you got the idea and how it was working with an artist.
It was amazing. Okay. So I had a very unusual experience with writing a children's book because I wrote a magazine story for grownups that was about big wave women surfers who were preparing for that season at Mavericks. And a children's book editor in New York saw the story, called me up and said, "Have you ever thought about writing kids' books?"
That's
and
cool.
I said, "Absolutely." And so that was highly unusual. And so I wrote the book and then tried it out with my kids that night at dinner, like reading it from my phone, and they loved it. The funny thing is that I wrote a picture book for 5 to 8 year olds. And at that time, it was because I was so immersed in because my kids were 5 and 8.
Exactly.
Immersed. Like I was reading, like you were describing, I was reading a bajillion books a day to them. And then my husband and I would laugh about the ones we just hated and would just
Oh, I know. Same with us. We just
because
we read every book in the library.
The worst book. Like it's just like it's like a plot summary over and over and over again. For whatever reason, sometimes they're like, please read that one again. But I think collectively as a family when you hit the gem, because everybody is like riveted and wants to read it over and over again. So I wrote the book about Sarah Gerhardt, who's the first woman to serve Mavericks. But I also was thinking about when I wrote that story, when I was thinking about how to do it, you see all these, there's a million like picture book biographies about people whose lives are fascinating, right? But it is like a start to finish, like their whole life. And that's not a good book. Like that's just, it's a fascinating life, but that doesn't necessarily make a good book. And so I thought, how can I solve for this problem while conveying like how amazing this person is? And I decided to just tell a story of the day that she meets her first big wave. And so everything's kind of compressed and distilled into this particular day, what it feels like, what she's thinking about, but you could see also like there's like some backstory to it. And then there's like a climactic moment where like that happens, where the wave is
I know, I love it. It's been generated in the North Pacific and you see it forming and so I wanted that, and actually took some inspiration from that kid's book about Philippe Petit, the man who walked between the towers. Right.
That book I thought was amazing. I think that it's, I can't remember the name.
That was an amazing book. I totally know what you're talking about. But I love that sense of, because I do have the sense my cousins in Hawaii are surfing the same wave energy that I'm surfing here.
We're all connected. We're all connected. I mean, that's so cool.
The pulse of the planet. Okay, here's another question. Have you done any swimming in the middle of Lake Tahoe away from shore? The water is not as cold as the bay, maybe, but one of the most sublime swimming experiences if you love swimming. Where are some of your favorite places to swim?
I have swum in Lake Tahoe, but not very much. I've had friends who have invited me, like, let's do the relay, the summer relay together. I just have never done it, but I have gone into the water and swum around in the deeper part of the lake. And it is sublime. I mean, I love that like crispness and clarity of the water. I would completely want to do more of that. Some of my favorite places to swim are in Hawaii, actually.
Ala Moana, right?
Ala Moana.
Because you wrote about that. That was great. I surf out there all the time.
Pool, right? It just feels like a giant natural pool. And I mean, I love Tunnels Beach in Kauai. But that's like, it's like the proximity to wildness is what makes that particular place amazing. I'm thinking a lot of Hawaii. Actually, I love that you have such a deep and personal connection to Hawaii, because I am finally getting back there after COVID for my brother-in-law's wedding next month. And I'm so excited.
Great. We'll see you there.
We'll talk.
Right.
I mean, it's just like, it's such a special place. I mean, all of the islands and all of the different.
That Honolulu Bay is just, I mean, it's the most beautiful place on earth. I mean, it's so gorgeous. So what I've really been dying to talk to you about too is like, and this is totally not related to swimming, so I felt like I wasn't allowed to do it. But now that we're near the end, I wanted to talk. We had Betty Louie from talking about Chinatown on the forum, like a couple months ago. It was a delightful evening, and yet it was great to just talk about this one Chinatown. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just Chinatowns in general. I mean, for everybody who's watching this, for the context, Bonnie's also written a book about Chinatowns in America, and maybe you can talk a little bit about just how they formed and their connection with each other. I just didn't want to leave without having the chance to hear what you might say about Chinatown as a place.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's it's been kind of heartbreaking over the pandemic to see how Chinatown communities specifically have been so pummeled, from many directions.
We were there for Chinese New Year at Chinatown in San Francisco this year. It was it was amazing, but like it was so scary, like basically a year ago now was, I think, kind of the low point for just how Chinatown felt to me then.
Yeah, I mean, I think just because of like the xenophobia and the racism, and then also because Chinatown is a neighborhood that so depends like so monumentally on foot traffic. Like people just like walking by and I want to grab this or I want to pick this up. And like it just wasn't, it didn't feel safe to so many people, even though over time it was like, okay, it is as safe as any place.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I mean, the neighborhood that we know and love are like the neighborhoods we know and love are super crowded and dense and full of like humanity. And I think, for better or worse, that is just something that we are not comfortable with right now. And again, like we're starting to be, and people are, I think here by and large, very responsible about that. And so I really I've been working, with some of my stories over the last year to kind of like support, like try to get people out to support independent restaurants and businesses in Chinatown. And Grace Young in New York's Chinatown has been doing so much. She's the like renowned cookbook author. And James Beard Award winning, author. And she just like has found this like new, like she was a legend in her own right before, but then like in pandemic has been like the champion of Chinatown and just like getting a lot of people like starting nonprofits to where like in the community that restaurants will provide meals to serve vulnerable people in the community. And like, so it's like this, I guess it's a virtuous circle where people are donating money so that this is helping everyone in many different points in the community. And so, I mean, I have such a, I wrote American Chinatown because it was like obviously a very personal story for me. It's my San Francisco and New York's Chinatown are the places where my family, first came to America and like made my life possible. And so I just feel, I felt like that at that time, that was the book that I needed to write. And then 10 years later, I felt that, this was the book that I needed to write. And so it is like, it's all kind of coming together in this really nice way. And so thank you for
I can't wait to see the next one. Rebecca's texting me all these messages. Wrap it up. But I have to ask you one more question. And that is if you have any advice for somebody who's just like thinking about starting swimming, like what advice do you have for somebody who's always thought of it as being like a great athletic activity, but for other people and just hasn't really tried it themselves?
You got this. Find a buddy. Find a good, if you're really, really just starting out, like total beginner, find a really good teacher. And, think about, be honest about like what your fears are and what your abilities are and what you want, like what your goal is. Like, is it to like be more comfortable in the ocean? Is it to, because you want to swim this like do this triathlon like in a year? Like, I think that having the community where you have someone who is your buddy, in a place where it feels unfamiliar and scary, who knows the place, like that's awesome. And then also having a really, really good teacher is just like, there's nothing like it.
That's great. Those are great. That's great advice for people starting any new thing. I love that. That's perfect. Yeah. And if you get the right, I can imagine just starting with a strong stroke and really understanding how to kind of the mechanics.
Yeah, and like flotation, it's just about, again, like breathing. It all comes back to like the breathing and relaxation and understanding that you have to work with the water, not against it. And I think that takes a lot of the fear away. Like once you realize your body is like, it knows what to do. Like it's pretty cool.
Well, I feel like I want to just go out and swim right now.
Tomorrow,
exactly. Well, hopefully my biggest problem is just I love surf so much. Anytime I'd be swimming, I'd be not surfing.
I feel you. You.
Well, I'm sorry about your ribs. I hope you heal really soon. It's tough. That's a tough one. You will though. It just feels terrible, but you'll be back to normal. Time is what
Patience.
It is. I can the things that are so hard. Well, for everybody, please join me next week when my guest will be Anna Malika Tubbs, author of The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. We'll be talking about the three women who raised and shaped some of America's most pivotal heroes. And we rely on your support, too, for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give on gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, THINK, to 76278. And Bonnie, thanks again for being just such a delightful guest. And thanks for your work in making swimming exciting and helping us to know why it is that we love the ocean so much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Good night, everybody.